Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this first of a series of forums that we're holding about the post-quarantine church. My name is Mike O'Neill. I'm currently the chair of the Heritage 21 Foundation Board, and so happens to be I'm also the chairman of the Christian Chronicle Board. Those are the two sponsors of these forums. As we all know, churches across America and really the world have faced an unprecedented challenge during the last 14 months. Due to the pandemic, congregations could not come together to meet like they've done for centuries. Physical togetherness has been and still is very limited. And the experience has had dramatic impact on individuals, on our society, and on churches. And much of that impact is yet to be even known. Some churches started meeting in smaller groups several months ago. Some are just now beginning to come back together, and some have not even begun. Very few have yet attempted to have their full slate of programs and activities restarted, and some programs may never restart again. These forums are simply a way for ministers and church leaders in the churches of Christ to share how each of us is experiencing the quarantine church, what concerns and fears and hopes and dreams that this experience has given us about ourselves and about our churches. What problems and divisions have emerged or have been accentuated by the pandemic? What's been learned? How do we best come back together and emerge strong from this time? And how it has changed us in our ministry and our churches. These forums are planned to be held once a month from April through August. And we're calling them forums because it's intended to be a time of sharing and dialogue. And while this technology is a great blessing, it's not ideal for feedback and interaction. So we'll encourage you to try to do that through the chat box that's on your screen, and emails to us. And there will be some, as we'll talk about later, some follow-up surveys to get your input as well. Your sponsors and the panelists do not have the prescriptions or all the correct answers to what we should do at this point. Rather, we simply want to hear each other and learn from each other. While we don't know what the final outcome will be of these forums, our prayer is that they will strengthen our fellowship and help our congregations to be more effective in blessing lives by shaping them in the image of Jesus. The forums are being organized and brought to you by the Heritage 21 Foundation and the Christian Chronicle. Some of you may not be familiar with the Christian Chronicle or the Heritage Foundation, but the foundation was formed by some longtime members of our fellowship to assist and advise congregations that are struggling with survival, to help them make sound and healthy decisions about the future and while protecting their faithfully gathered resources. Its sole purpose is to serve local churches and in our fellowship. And the Christian Chronicle, of course, has been around since 1943. It's a newspaper that's committed to the highest standards of journalistic excellence and seeks to inform, to inspire, and to unite the churches of Christ worldwide. We'd also like to thank Lipscomb University as they are graciously providing the technology platform for this and the rest of our forums. The topic of today's forum is uncovering the short-term and long-term impact of the quarantine church. The moderator of this forum is one of the trustees of Heritage 21, Rick Gibson. Rick is a former minister, and he now serves as the senior vice chancellor at Pepperdine University. Rick is joined by a terrific panel for our discussion today, and he'll now introduce those panelists to you and start the forum. Rick?
Thank you, Mike. I'll make sure you can all hear me. So thumbs up, please. Okay. Thank you so much for joining today. This is an important conversation. We're glad that you can be a part of it. As Mike said, served as a minister before, and I know at least a little what it's like in my 11 years in ministry to feel connected at times, but also isolated at times. And if there is any word that has defined the moment we're in, isolation is probably one of those top words. So I hope this is a way for us to get together to think through some things with one another. I am going to invite you to participate in this conversation even today. So I hope that you are ready. For those of you who are willing to show your bright, shiny faces, please do so. If you don't want to, that's okay too. We understand. If you are still in your PJs, I am a little worried about you. But if not, please let us see you. Um, on a normal year, Mike Cope and Mike is one of the panelists, we'd be preparing for the big event at Pepperdine Harbor, the Pepperdine Bible Lectures. And sadly, we're not going to be able to meet again in person this year. But we recognize many of you and would love to, um, and are happy that we can connect this way. Let me introduce the panelists. And if you would, Caleb, please spotlight Mike and Eric and Dr. Connie Horton. That would be great. Um, Mike Cope, as you know, is my colleague from Pepperdine. He lives in Abilene, Texas, opting that over Malibu, but Mike still makes good judgments and judgment calls. Um, and Mike is the uh, director of ministry outreach for Pepperdine, has been so for over 7 years now, and is doing some tremendous work in the community of church leaders and especially ministers. I believe he'll have some great insight today. So, Mike, thank you so much for being with us. If you will, say hello to the group, Mike.
It is good to see everyone. I've got a lot of feedback. Go on, Rick. Let me work on feedback.
Okay. I'd like to also introduce a friend of mine, a dear friend, Dr. Connie Horton. If you can, spotlight Connie. Connie is a vice president at Pepperdine, and she serves in student affairs. She's also a licensed psychologist, and she has been working very directly in response to some of the anxiety and the feelings and the challenges that have come to people personally through the quarantine and the pandemic. And so, Connie, if you would, just say hello.
Good afternoon. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you, Connie. I appreciate it. And finally, I'd like to introduce a good friend. Most of you will know Eric Trickestad. He is the CEO of the Christian Chronicle. He's been writing about the post-quarantine church or the quarantine church all along the way. He's very interested in some of the feedback that we will get today. But Eric is, again, partnered with Heritage 21 to hold these forums, and I know that he's going to provide some very interesting insight along the way. So, Eric, thank you for being here. Please say hello to our group.
Hi, it's nice to be here. As Rick said, we've actually written a few stories in a series called The Post-Pandemic Church, and I'm pleased to see one or two folks that I've actually talked to as part of that series with us here today. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Rick, I think I got that. I think I got that fixed. And I did want to say hi to everybody.
Okay,
it's good to
please,
see
Mike.
you. And it is true, you and I are colleagues at Pepperdine, but to be clear, you sign my checks. I don't sign yours. So
That's right.
there's a power differential.
That's right. Well, and you never let me forget that, do you? So, well, listen, thank you for saying yes to this invitation then, Mike. To get us started today, what I'd like to do is to remind some of you or to let some of you know that, oh, wait, before I do that, forgive me, one more introduction. Stan Granberg. Please highlight Stan if you would. Say hello, Stan. Stan's a good friend, member of Heritage 21. He will be kind of co-hosting with me to help keep track of some of the questions that come in and all the moderation that's necessary. So Stan, thank you. I appreciate you being here and helping out.
You're welcome.
Some of you may know that in 2015, Pepperdine worked with the Barna Group, specifically working with David Kinnaman to really look into the question and to assess the state of ministers in American Protestant churches. We looked at ministers' personal well-being, the effectiveness of their ministries, and their perceptions of their impact upon the culture. And it was a fascinating study. If you have not seen it. It is still relevant, even though it did not in any way anticipate the moment that we're in. But this was a study that began to help us understand the kinds of questions um, we needed to be asking so that we could be supporting the church. And today, while there will be down the road in these forums, I believe a lot of good ideas and answers coming. Today, we kind of want to pause and simply take the pulse. And if you were to give a headline to what today is about, it is asking ministers the all important question, how are you doing? What is your well being like? Those questions still seem relevant. What is the well being of ministers? Um, how do they feel about the effectiveness of their ministries? Are they optimistic or pessimistic about them? What are their perceptions of the impact of their ministries upon the culture? Before the quarantine, there were some troubling stats that came out of the study, a couple data points that were interesting. And it wasn't all bad, but there were some that were concerning. One of the things that churches was facing before the pandemic was that in the last 25 years, the average age of ministers, now this is ministers, pastors across all Protestant churches in the United States, but the average age had risen from 45 to 50, 44 to 54, 10 years. Protestant churches were facing, before the pandemic, a massive leadership shortage in the coming decades. The situation even appeared to be kind of bleak. 1 out of 10 ministers were reporting that it is becoming more and more difficult to identify promising pastoral candidates, ministers. And so one of the things that we have wondered, and we will even try to explore a little bit today, is the question as to whether or not the pandemic has accelerated that. Interesting, a recent Barna study shows that 29% of ministers said they are seriously considering leaving ministry at this moment. And so that's a current piece of information. I don't know if that number seems high to you, but it is raising alarm bells, at least in my mind. Before the pandemic, before the quarantine, we were hearing 1 in 3 ministers were facing burnout. Nearly 50% faced relational risks in their marriages, families, and friendships. Many were facing mental health struggles, with 50% dealing with depression. 1 in 5 ministers were dealing with addictions of various kinds. Ministers reported experiencing doubt in their faith. And if they were not experiencing doubt in their faith, they were, in fact, experiencing doubt in their own calling. Mike Cope, I want to reach out to you. You were helpful to us in that study. And again, we were looking pre-COVID-19, pre-quarantine. But does that resonate with some of what you were seeing in the ministers in Churches of Christ?
It does. And as you know, one of my roles at Pepperdine is I lead a big Lily initiative that Pepperdine is a part of called Thriving in Ministry. We call it Sanctuary, a safe place for ministers. And it's validated. So I get together with people from 120 other programs funded by Lily, and everybody. It's not unique to Churches of Christ, it's across the board. And through that, I'm part of a national pastoral caregiving team out of Duke. And I'm telling you, it's again and again, there's some unique things about our churches, our heritage, but it's not unique that there is a shift in the winds of people's intentions to stay in ministry. And all of that, I think, has been just exacerbated by this. I was with one cohort I was leading and asked, so what's the word you would pick to describe the year? And the winner, we decided, was the word unrelenting. It just was unrelenting. There was never a stop. Somebody said, I feel like I have bald tires. I can't get any traction, but I can't stop. I can't, there's no time for a pit stop. There's no time to pull over. And so I have to keep going on bald tires. Now, all of you here know what a potential formula for catastrophe that is. That kind of deep weariness. You remember in Fellowship of the Rings, Bilbo Baggins says to Gandalf, "I'm just thin. I feel like too little butter spread over too much bread." And that's a pretty good image, I think. There's the isolation that many of you have gone through this year, losing contact with your closest resources, losses that you've suffered. I've actually lost friends. I'm old enough that people my age were in the high risk category. And then summer started to roll around and we heard the name George Floyd. And all of a sudden, the political unrest, the racial unrest, society upended so that you couldn't say anything without somebody being upset with you. And you couldn't even sit down over coffee with them, at least in the beginning. There was the technology crisis. Many of you here, especially those of us who didn't just get out of college, were like, how do you do all of this? How do you live stream? How do you, and some of you became eager early learners and you called your kids and grandkids just like I did. But on top of it all, it's just politics is shot through our churches right now. And as you well know, it spilled over in, and it's almost like we don't gather as a people around the story of Jesus or the Sermon on the Mount, but people bring their political agendas. And I know that's wearisome and it's unrelenting. And it's been my privilege to lead a lot of cohorts of ministers. And so part of what I want to say is, as an older guy on here, I affirm the hard work you've done. But as we go, part of what we want to say is you can't keep spreading too little butter over too much bread. You can't keep driving with bald tires. But anyway, that's to say you're right, Rick. There were already some things that got our attention, but the unrelenting pace of the loneliness, of the political upheavals, of all of that has affected ministers.
Yeah. I'll let you know that I've lost two friends during the pandemic. One of them was a professor of mine. I lost him early on, older man, to COVID. And then there was another that I knew generally, but I've lost two friends. I'm wondering if by show of hands, how many on this call know the name of someone in their church or in their network or in their circle where they have lost somebody to COVID. Think about that and look at that. That's an awful lot of pain and loss. I lost my dad during all of this, and it was not to COVID, but I will say I do think it was in some ways COVID related. He was living in isolation. We were trying to connect with him and still be with him. My sister was there every day, but somehow I feel like my dad had some health issues, but he also kind of gave up. And when it came time to mourn and gather around my dad, the church, no fault of its own, was absent. There were no hugs. There were lots of letters, lots of emails, even a Zoom gathering like this. But what we needed from the church was not there. It couldn't. We couldn't. We had a very small memorial at his graveside. I'm sure that in one way or another, you have all experienced something like that. Thank you for raising your hand on that. It is a stark reminder, seeing all those raised hands, how much loss there has been in this moment. And it's still with us. What I'd like to do now is invite you to, if you're willing, and by the way, I'm going to ask you to answer a couple of poll questions today. And one of them is, we're about to do our first one. They are completely confidential. There's no way we will know who it is, but we'd like to kind of ask and kind of get a pulse from this room right now. And that is, on a scale of 1 to 5, kind of rank the quality of your personal well-being. How are you doing right now? And I realize it's not a scientific poll. It's not anything like that. Many of you will be answering that in different ways, but we'd kind of like to see how you're doing. So the quality of your personal well-being since the quarantine, is it worse or is it better? 1 to 5. Caleb, if you will, put that poll up. We're going to give everybody a couple of seconds to respond to that.
Yeah,
And then,
let me jump in here. Our campus internet went out, and so I was kicked out of the meeting. I was made you the host, so you actually have control of that at the moment.
Oh, I see. Um,
So if you go down the bottom toolbar where it says polling,
okay.
and
Yep.
first question there, and you can click launch poll.
Okay. Thank you. So folks, we will not guarantee this is a professional webinar, but it is an honest webinar. So we're gonna do our
Caleb,
best.
can you instruct him also how to put the speaker as the primary
Yes. So
view?
if you go to the upper right-hand corner where it says view, and if you click that, make it active speaker, and then on Mike, on his picture, it should say in the upper left hand, remove spotlight.
Yeah, he's not spotlighted at the moment. So, okay. All right. I will talk and drive
There we
here
go.
a little bit. All right. We'll give you a couple more seconds here. Now, Caleb, I don't know how to show this to the crowd, so I'll go ahead and just report it out.
Caleb, can Rick just make you the host again?
All right, to keep moving here, what I'll do is I'll just kind of report out what I've seen so far. Thank you for responding, by the way. On a scale of 1 to 5, how are you doing since the quarantine? From 1 being worse to 5 being better. The majority of you are in the 2, 3, and 4 area. There are some that are doing better now, and that is wonderful and amazing to me. And I see, and I want to even get to at some point some of the hopefulness that's in this. Some are doing worse, and that's not surprising. I will tell you, my guess is these answers might even change on the time of day or the day of the week or what has happened. But by and large, we're seeing 3 and 4, both 31, 35% are doing okay. And so we'll want to get some sense of what doing okay might mean. Connie, if I can turn to you, let me ask you, I'm going to try to spotlight you here. Connie, I'm wondering if you could give us a sense of what it's like right now for the people that you are counseling, your team is working with. You probably are also seeing a range of emotional and personal responses to this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you ended on, that there is really the full range. And I'm sure that's true in this group and in your congregations. For some people, it's been like this whole pandemic has been filled with maybe inconveniences and disappointments, but maybe not that much more than that, although that's hard enough. And then others have had profound loss, and maybe their families have lost their jobs. And so students are really struggling. Can they continue in college and all those kinds of issues? But I think there is a pervasive, like, we've been through something, and in the college population, which isn't that different than the general population, anxiety and depression were on the increase anyway. And so then add a year of pandemic onto that. And it's expected in the fall when our students come back that across the country, it's going to be more intense anxiety, more intense depression. And what helps people is social support. So we hope when your congregations are getting back together, when the university can get back together, that's going to help. But what this year has been is a bad combination of lots of stressors of all different kinds and levels, from inconvenience, disappointed with missing graduation or missing friends, those kinds of things, all the way to profound losses. And then at the same time, less social support, less connection, less hugging, less being in each other's presence. And that's a bad combination. When you go through stressful times, one of the things that helps most is being in community. And so those who have struggled to be in community, that's been a double whammy. And so we've seen that here, and I'm guessing all of you ministers have seen that in your own lives and in your congregation's lives.
Connie, I wonder if you might speak to what you see as a special challenge for leaders in in this moment. I mean, they're experiencing so much of this personally, but they're also trying to lead people who are also experiencing this.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good point. And, welcome to the human condition. You are not robots dispensing ministry advice or something. You are people who are in it yourselves. And so you're not immune from all of this. It seems to me that you may be dealing with your own losses, your own burnout, maybe compassion fatigue. It's hard to care over time and, to rally to some of the things that would be helpful, like being flexible, being adaptive, being creative is a little bit hard right now. But I hope as you're able to get more together again, that those energies will come back.
Yeah, thank you, Connie. I'd like to put another poll in if I can here, and it looks like, and thank you, by the way, all for participating in that last one. And then I'm going to ask some of you some questions, see if I can get some response from our group. The next one has to do with, let's see, close that one, and poll. All right, there we go. I can share results that way. Were you all able to see those results at this point? Great. That means I learned how to do something today. Very good. All right. Let me now go to another here. Poll number 2. One of the things that we saw in the Barna study before the pandemic was there were people that were really trying to address the way they felt about their ministries themselves. And as ministers, were they optimistic? Were they more pessimistic? And again, I understand it. The day of the week matters. I could ask you this one day and it will be one answer, another day another. But I'm wondering how everybody's feeling. Are they optimistic about their ministries? Are they finding themselves more pessimistic since the quarantine? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, give you a couple minutes here and to respond if you would, and then I will share the results and we'll talk a little bit about that. And Eric, I'll be going to you here in just a minute to maybe respond to some of this. So 1 is highly pessimistic, 5 is highly optimistic. All right, just a couple more minutes here. Thank you all for voting, by the way, and sharing your views. I appreciate it. It is anonymous. All right, just a few more. Okay. Let me share these results with you. Are you all seeing that? By and large, we have we're doing okay, optimistic to highly optimistic. We're skewing towards optimism. I'd like to explore that a little bit and wonder if there is somebody in our group that is feeling optimistic about this moment. Tell us what that is. What are those things that cause you today to say, this is I have reason to be optimistic about what's coming. So let me go ahead and see if one of you had raised your hand. Otherwise, I've got a few names I might call on here in a minute. Unmute yourself if you have an answer as to, Rick, here's what I'm feeling optimistic about the moment we're in. Anybody? All right. Yeah, John Simons or Simmons. Is it Simmons or Simons? Unmute yourself, please.
Simmons.
Hi, Simmons. John.
We've been very optimistic, primarily because, first of all, particularly in the last 4 weeks, there's been a coming back together. I'm from Tennessee, and our governor has basically opened the state back up without a lot of restrictions. Still local control in the larger metropolitan areas, but I think the pandemic and being apart has helped us realize what we had. because our congregation is very close and we've missed that. And this last month, as more and more have come back after getting vaccinations and some of the restrictions being relaxed, there's just our worship service Sunday was just fantastic, enthusiastic. But also during the pandemic, we realized that we really didn't have some ministries and mechanisms in place to really identify and minister to people even under normal circumstances. And that's been an awakening for our elders. And we had an elders meeting last night, and we just unveiled some things that we have identified and that we want to put in place, not only just for post-COVID, but for even just continued ministry in areas that we realized we were deficient in.
Yeah.
And people are really just standing in line to help. It's just it's great.
I love hearing that motivation. I love hearing that response. Sometimes we don't know what we have until we've lost it for a while.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So are you seeing, John, a good, not much drop off in attendance, or is that still building? Is it going to take some time for everyone to come back?
Well, it'll take some time, but our congregation's about 450 or so. And even as recent as 4 weeks ago, we were actually having about 250 on average, actually at the building, another 50 or so households joining online. But in the last month, as people have gotten the second vaccinations and relaxations, we're up over 400 again, and people are, and it's going up every week. And as we've contacted our members, there's so many say, well, yeah, we really haven't been coming, but we've been worshiping online, but we're coming back, so we anticipate those numbers increasing really week to week for the next few weeks.
Very good. That's very encouraging. Ed Eason, do I have that right? You had something you had your hand raised. Let me go ahead and spot it.
Thank you, Rick. I was just saying I'm optimistic because I feel like in many ways this has been a pruning. When you go through a time, it's kind of complicated by the fact that I've been trying to retire in the midst of a pandemic, and at the same time realized that the nonprofit organization I lead wasn't ready for a pandemic, nor was my church ready. I'm an elder at our church, about roughly around 350 or so, and so it's just, I found that in the midst of all this, you really start to assess what really is essential, what's really important. And of course, you keep coming back to people, you keep coming back to relationships, but then you got to ask yourself, how do I do that in a new way? And how do I do that with a church that is never going to be the same? And so you start to realize that there's certain things that you've got to stop doing if you're going to start doing other things. And so that's, kind of been the experience for me.
Yeah, thank you for that. Can I follow up just a little bit? If you're willing to share, what might be one of those things that may be on the stop list, and what might be one of those things on the do more of list or start list?
Well, one of the things on the stop list is just stop being so busy trying to keep programs up and running. What has to stop is all this energy given to supporting infrastructure things that really aren't essential. And for example, in the nonprofit City Square that I'm a vice president, we've realized that we just had to take and close some of the efforts that we've done for years to minister to the homeless and to the people that are experiencing poverty. We've had to learn what it is that we need to start doing. For example, we need to start doing emergency services and handing out less clothes, and help people more with food and rental assistance, and stop being academic and philosophic about how you solve poverty and get practical with it. So we've had to learn that kind of lesson. And in church, I've been spending the year with our youth group, and I've learned amazing things from them. They didn't give up on relationships, and they didn't. They found ways to organize themselves and stay in relationship with one another. And I've learned a lot about how you can do that not only through technology, but how you can do that just through some things that all adults have kind of given up on, like doing individual visits on people's porches. A teenager will jump in their car and go spend hours with a friend, or they'll spend hours on a phone with a friend. And, those are some things that I forgot to do as an elder. So that's been helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me go to the other side of the country. Out here in California, we're just now starting to open up. We've got good numbers these days, and we're excited about that. But as you know, we've been under pretty strict quarantine rules. I wonder if I might, Woody, are you there, Woody Square? What's it like out in California right now?
Yes, I'm here. This is not a martini. I just want to make that known. We are enjoying sunny weather in Martini, but in California. Okay. California, we are doing well, I think, in San Leandro. I mean, there have been setbacks. I mean, we've had losses, but I think our church, for the most part, they've done a pretty good job adapting. I think we've opened up our ears to the community. A few weeks ago, we had a socially distanced outdoor drive-in movie or walk-in movie where we showed a movie against the wall. We measured off places for people to sit, had tape down, and had people in the community join us. We've invited people to be a part of our online service, especially to participate in our children's sermon online. And that's, been, I think that's been pretty good to have something that's active and would involve active learning online, but then involve a couple people, a couple of neighbors. Of course, they weren't there last week, but who knows? We experiment, we try things, and we just keep going and responding to opportunities that God gives to us.
Yeah.
I like what the last minister said. If we're going to start something new, there's some things we have to stop. I think that's a hard one for some people, especially if they're emotionally invested in something that's become maybe a sacred cow. And I think that's going to be maybe the challenge for a number of churches. I think for us, some of the leaders, the fact that they have let go of some things, I think has been a key for us. And I'll just add one more thing. I know I'm talking a lot. The fact that our leadership have affirmed us when we've done small things well, I think it's been really, really important, and have told us that, even though things have been hard, you guys can do hard things. Actually, to borrow that from
Connie
Horton, you can do hard things. And so our leaders have affirmed us in that, and I think that has helped us a lot. Anyway, probably
Thank
talked
you,
too
Woody.
much, but
No, not at all. Thank you, Woody. Eric, let me turn to you. I want to just ask you, you've been covering across the nation and even around the world the story of the Quarantine Church. How are these stories resonating with you? Do they sound familiar? Are there other stories that you're seeing as you go out and learn about the churches?
Sure. Well, I can tell you that even before the pandemic started, one of the series that we were stories we were covering, of course, and you've seen in our pages before, is just the general, decline of numbers in our fellowship to begin with. And then following up on something that Connie said, you talking about a trend that was present already, then getting exacerbated by the pandemic. And that's kind of one of the things that we're looking at now as we look at the post-pandemic church, is that we're just concerned that the numbers that were already on the decline are continuing down on, down. And one of the things that I am seeing is that there seems to be a big push by a lot of churches to just get back to the way things were before the pandemic. But if you've been following anything that we've been covering in the Christian Chronicle, you'll note that we were on a decline before the pandemic started. I do think there are more new ideas emerging, though. And one of the things that I'm seeing, and I almost sense, at first I was a little surprised by the poll results being mostly positive, and it may just be a result of the moment that we're in right now. There's little elation of coming out of lockdowns and things like that. But there also is a lot of innovation, I think, going on, whether it's preaching on top of rooftops or thinking of new ideas, thinking in different terms that's kind of come out of the pandemic. And one of the things is the way that we actually view success in ministry. And that was one of the things in the first part of our series that we did on the post-pandemic church. I talked to Ben Pickett, one of the ministers down at the West Houston Church of Christ. And I loved what he said. He said, ministers, a lot of us used to measure the success of an event by the number of people that show up for that event. That was what success meant. He said, now we measure the success of an event by whether or not the event was able to happen at all in any fashion. That is our new standard of success. We've moved the goalpost, as it were. And it's also occurred to me how strange it was. I mentioned this in one of the stories I wrote, that the pandemic absolutely turned our expectations of what success looks like on its ear. All of a sudden, the mega churches that so many of us, I think, longed to be, the 2,000 member mega churches, they really had struggles meeting. I think it was Jeff Walling that said, suddenly the idea of packing 2,000 people into one auditorium is not so great. However, little rural congregations that have shrunk, that have these big buildings that they don't need for the size of the membership that they have, suddenly have the ideal space for meeting socially distanced. And I talked to several ministers in smaller rural congregations who were elated that they had moved to an online presence, sometimes in hybrid. Oklahoma, we never really fully locked down. There were really only a couple of months maybe where you had no church service of any kind. And then we started this hybrid model after that. And as these churches started meeting again, they were incorporating the Zoom elements of it as well. And there were several little congregations in rural Oklahoma that were like, we finally got Sister Sue, who we haven't seen in years, and she's in assisted living, but somebody puts up their iPad and she can join us for Sunday morning worship. And a member that moved away to the big city that we never thought we'd see again, they're worshiping with us every morning. So the church membership requirements almost have changed to where you can cherry pick which congregation you go to. I have visited the church that I grew up in, the now Thomaston Road Church of Christ in Macon, Georgia. A little shout out for them. I've visited them more in the last year than I ever have before because it's all been virtual. And I've been able to sit in on their Bible class and see someone that people that I grew up with in that church. So that's really been interesting. It's also been interesting to see the way that our European brothers and sisters have reacted to this. I've really seen an amazing growth in the unity and involvement of the churches of Christ in Europe that have gotten together through multiple Zoom seminars. I mean, they almost feels like they're thriving over there, and they've been able to get people in who wouldn't darken the door of a church. So that's one of the more exciting innovations that's come out of this, Rick. And I feel like I've talked long enough there. So.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I will say that in speaking with David Kinnaman and Barna, they have a lot of studies in the field right now looking at this, and there are others as well, but Barna is certainly looking at this. And I asked David an impossible question. I said, as you look forward, what do you think is coming next? And some of this was actually raised even on the response from you all today. One thing is surviving the moment. The next thing is when you get to the place where you decide what stays, what goes, what's important, what's not. There are some big decisions coming that can be challenging to a church, to be sure. One of the things he pointed to was that he was saying a lot like, is it Tom Rainier? I think you probably know it one of both ways. So anyway, that we should be looking at up to 25% of our church goers from before the quarantine won't be back. But David, while he had some concern of that, he said the churches that are most prepared to engage the full person, the whole person, those churches are going to thrive and make headway in their communities. Those that are really basing their ministry on the appointed hour, we've all learned how to sort of participate in that, consume that, however you want to say it, in different ways. And we're looking for something else. People are looking for something else. And so he also warned that he believed there was, and Connie, I'm sure, would confirm this, he also warned that there is he believes, a tsunami of mental health issues coming, especially with our young people. Churches were already experiencing an attrition before the pandemic. He believes that's likely to be accelerated. Let me switch gears very quickly because we, believe it or not, are almost out of time. I want to get a sense of something. As if the pandemic wasn't enough. In the midst of that, it seemed like whatever 800-pound gorilla or elephant in the room, whatever it was awakened and is still awake and in a rage. And so, as Mike was mentioning, there were all kinds of issues that began to emerge during the pandemic, and we were all glued to our TVs because where else were we going to go? And we became pretty involved and agitated, and many of our members did. Now, that's our perception of some. It may not be the case of others. But one of the things we looked at early on before the pandemic in our State of Pastors, State of Ministers study was that nearly all church ministers say that they believe their churches should play an important role in dealing with conflict, social issues, but only half say it's among their church's priorities. How to bring reconciliation to their communities, for example. Most churchgoers in the poll from before the pandemic, most churchgoers do not want to hear anything on Sunday about social or political issues, and only 8% of churchgoers want to hear teaching on those issues. And so everything from whether it be same-sex marriage, climate change, racial reconciliation, those questions, while they were top of mind in some ways during the week, there was during the appointed hour and other times where they were completely off limits. I'm going to try to put one more poll up here and try to get a, let's see if I can do it here, and get a sense about our politics and social issues. We're hearing this from a lot of ministers we're working with, where politics and social issues have crept into the congregational life enough to create some difficult conversations. So 1 meaning not at all, 5 meaning very much. Give us a sense of how this dynamic is playing out in your ministries now. So let me launch that poll, and I'll ask you all to participate in that for just a moment. Mike O'Neill, I'll be going to you here shortly. Before I do that, Mike Cope, I will probably turn to you on this topic, all right? I'll give it a couple more seconds here. All right. So let me share the results of that. Again, 4 seems to be our favorite answer of the day. But we're seeing a range of responses here from not at all, which feels like a blessing to me, to very much, to a range in between. The largest number being 30% are saying 4, that there is certainly elements of this in their ministries. Mike Cope, let me, I know that you're working with ministries and ministers across the country. What are you seeing here?
Well, I think everybody here knows that, I mean, the frustrating thing was that things like when do we return and do we wear masks and so on, that those were all kind of fought within churches based on politics, and that grew weary. And most of us here, I think, have a feeling that a lot of our church members, when they first wake up in the morning, are popping on Fox News or MSNBC, whatever their choice is, before they think about getting up and praying for the church or being spiritually formed. So we know, and yet we ministers have always had things we have to face, right? And so this is one of the challenges now. It's a great chance for us to remind people that we are the people of God. The kingdom of God is broken in. There are important issues we speak about. We have to speak out about that. But it gets back to me to the importance of health in us in ministry. And so I just loop back and say, if you're kind of at the Bilbo Baggins point, it's time to either get more butter or less bread. It's time to pull back, get some rest. If you feel like you're spinning on bald tires, it's time to pull off, to get some help, talk to friends, do those things that bring you to a place of daily spiritual formation, to remember that even though it may be hard in your church, in your times of meditation and prayer, you are the beloved of God. And you're not determined by what somebody said about your last sermon, by what made somebody mad about a video you put on Facebook. By the way, don't put videos on Facebook. But all of those things, you are being formed in the way of Jesus Christ. And it gives you a chance to be, if we were psychologists, we'd say differentiated. The temperature in the room goes up, and we're able to sit there and listen to people and love them and open the conversation for more. A lot of us have heard the saying, don't waste a good pandemic. Well, this is a good chance to reboot. And I've been listening to several of you talk and think, yes, that's it. Ed, when you talked about teenagers, what you've learned from them, that's an important thing. By the way, I can't wait to see you make some TikTok videos, Ed. I think you could do it. Ed's been on the cutting edge of youth ministry for a long time. You could do that, brother. But we have learned from them how vital it is for us not to be alone. And those ministers who have thrived the most through this are ones that stayed connected. I'm looking at a buddy who's on here, who's in one of these cohorts. And this was back in the midst of all the lockdown, and everybody in the cohort that day was at a 1 on these questions. It's like, everybody, how many want to quit today? And, all the hands went up. And at the end, one of them said, I have a keyboard here. Do you mind if I just want to give something to the group? And he played How Sweet, How Heavenly is the Sight. And we were all trashed. The whole group was trashed. Bruce Bates was on the call with me, and one of us needed to step in, and we couldn't. We were just bawling our eyes out. It was just like, yes, what we learned about church growing up is really true. It's sweet. It's heavenly, this taste of these people. And so if you happen to be somebody that spent a lot of time isolated from others, keep finding ways to engage with those people who give you life. Find the people that don't need a pastor, people that just want a friend.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Well, listen, I want to say to you that we hope that this forum becomes a way for you to connect and network with others. There will be plenty of time as we move forward, because we're moving out of this quarantine in real time. We're learning from each other in real time here, and that's why we think these conversations are so important. But we hope this will become a network for you, a way of sharing. You'll receive a poll after this in an email asking you to give some feedback about those things that have encouraged you during the quarantine, those things that are working for you, maybe some ideas that we could begin to share. But today we wanted to start simply by touching base, checking in. We felt like the first step for an honest conversation was to check in with you, even through these screens. So we want to thank you. I'm very pleased with 85% poll participation. That's pretty good. So thank you for sharing the feedback. Thank you for allowing us to take a few moments to sort of check in as into how we are feeling and thinking about things. I know, again, what we asked today might be different tomorrow and the day after that. And that is the moment that we are definitely in. If you allow me, before I turn it over to Mike O'Neill to close us out, I'd like to just pray over you all for just a moment and to and just to ask the Lord's blessing upon you. Father, I am grateful for the people on this call, the men and women who have called you, Lord, and have received a calling to serve you in your kingdom. I pray for their ministries, for their well-being, for their health, for their joy. I pray for that you lift them up in moments when they are down, that you will gather them in community with others who will pray with them, laugh with them, share a meal together when we can finally get together. Whatever it takes, Lord, to be connected one to another. Father, I pray especially for unity in our churches. First of all, in the body of Christ as a whole, but today especially for the churches of Christ. I sense that this is a reset moment for us to, if we will allow it, to understand one another, to hear one another, and to help one another. My prayer, Lord, is that we will come together in a moment when we've all been struggling through something we never thought we would live through. Again, Father, I praise you and thank you for the people who are on this call. I pray that the conversation that has begun today will continue, will flourish, and will bear fruit. I thank you for your Son, Jesus, for without him, none of this matters. All of our hope is in him, and we are grateful for his precious gift to us. And we pray in his name. Amen. Thank you all very much. And Mike O'Neill, back to you to close us out. Please unmute yourself, Mike.
Thank you, brothers and sisters. This has been extremely rich. I am so gratified that there are many on this call, and I'm sure many others, but that you would take the time to be with us, because we're all searching for how we serve the King better. And so we just need to have occasions like this to learn from one another. And I took copious notes of wonderful comments. I hope we'll have some way to share those and collect them from others. But wow, so many comments. Let me just summarize 3 or 4 of them. We knew that all of you ministers, we're all ministers, even those of us that are not in the pulpit daily. But we are ministers, and we knew that that was a struggle even before COVID. It has been, as we said, unrelenting during this COVID time, mainly, I suppose, from uncertainty is not easy for us to cope with. You know, I heard in different ways the need for community, the need for being together, the need for those hugs. God knew what we needed, didn't he, for us as human beings. And that's why he created the church. And as leaders in this church, we need to find ways to be together. And I'm hearing many church leaders beginning to say today, it is wonderful when we get together with 300 or 1,000 or 1,500, but we also need to have those occasions where it is smaller groups, because we are more accountable, we are more involved, we are more engaged with one another. And so I hope to see some of that emerge out of all of this. Thank you that so many of you are optimistic. And we pray that those who are on that pessimistic scale will begin to see some good reasons why perhaps God, as he refines us, he also refines the church through difficulty and challenge. And so there's reason to know that he is still in charge, and he is still the one who will determine what the future looks like in our fellowship. So, wow, just so many wonderful things here about the opportunity now to reboot and to deal with the elephants that have been in the room, and those things that we need to stop doing. I could go on, but you've heard it. And again, we just thank you all. We thank our panelists for their leading us in some of this conversation. And this was the first of several of these forums. Many of the future ones will begin to address, okay, what can we now do? What can we share that is working? And we hope to do a number of those every month. We'll be sending you emails about the future ones and the times. The next one will be on May the 27th. So if you want to mark that on your calendar, it'll likely be late afternoon or evening, depending on the decisions that we have to make. And so be sure and plan to join us for those. We'll do it every month. If you have ideas for these forums, share them with us. And you can certainly go to our webpage, the Heritage 21 Foundation webpage. That's www.heritage21.com.org. And you will find there the topics for the future forums and ways to respond and be in touch with us, and the resources that we will now be able to put up. So on behalf of the Christian Chronicle and on behalf of the Heritage 21 Foundation, thank you again for participating today. We hope it's been encouraging to you. It certainly has been to me. And we again pray that God's kingdom will be blessed in all of its manifestations, which are different everywhere. Just wonderful to see us unifying, learning from one another. And I was going to pray for us again, but I would not be any more articulate with God than was Rick. So Rick, thank you for that. I certainly amen those. Again, thank you. We hope to see you on May the 27th. Any of my other panelists did I forget anything that we need to tell everyone here?
I think that was pretty good, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Right.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
God bless everyone.
Thank you all.
Blessings to all.